You walk away from the conversation and your hands are shaking. Your chest feels tight, your head feels heavy, and there is a strange hollow feeling inside you, like something important was taken without your permission. No one raised their voice, no one insulted you directly, nothing obvious happened, and yet you feel exhausted, confused, and quietly ashamed for not being able to explain why. You replay the words in your mind again and again. I was just joking. You're too sensitive. I only say this because I care. They sound harmless. They even sound loving. But your body knows the truth before your mind does. Something about that interaction drained you. Something about that person left you smaller than before. This happens at work with a coworker who smiles while cutting you down. It happens at home with a partner who turns every concern into your fault. It happens with family members who wrap guilt in kindness and call it love. You stay polite. You choose your words carefully. You try to explain your intentions, your feelings, your logic. And while you are busy being decent, they are busy watching you crack. You explain more. They smile more. You apologize. They relax. You feel the energy leaving your body while they seem calmer, lighter, almost satisfied. Here is the part no one tells you. This is not a communication problem. This is not about empathy or misunderstanding. This is a power exchange, and you are paying the price without realizing it. Some people don't connect to understand. They connect to extract. Your reactions are their reward. Your confusion is their control. Your kindness is the doorway they walk through. You are not weak, broken, or naive. You are responding normally to an abnormal dynamic designed to leave you doubting yourself. Once you see this pattern clearly, the exhaustion starts to make sense, and the confusion stops feeling personal. That realization is where real control quietly begins for you today. If you feel drained after every interaction, the problem is not your sensitivity. It's the game you're being pulled into. 500 years ago, a man named Machiavelli wrote ideas that made people uncomfortable, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. Machiavelli did not write about how people should behave in a perfect world. He wrote about how people actually behave when power, fear, and self-interest are involved. That distinction matters more today than ever. Because when you deal with a toxic person, you are not dealing with a bad day, a misunderstanding, or an emotional phase. You are dealing with a pattern, a mechanism, a repeatable system that runs the same way every time. Toxic people don't suddenly hurt you by accident. They follow an internal logic. They push, they provoke, they confuse. Then they feed on your reaction. If you see them as just emotional or deep down a good person, you stay trapped. Machiavelli would say, this is where most people lose. They treat reality like a moral discussion instead of a strategic situation. This video is not here to heal them, explain them, or soften them. It is not here to teach you how to phrase things better or communicate more kindly. That advice keeps you exposed. This video exists to give you a different frame. One that helps you stop being manipulated. One that helps you keep your energy. One that pulls you out of a game you never agreed to play. When you understand the mechanism, the personal pain becomes impersonal. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start seeing, oh, this is how this system works. And once you see the system, you can step out of it without anger, without drama, and without guilt. That is the Machiavellian shift. Not cruelty, not coldness, clarity. This video is not about being nice. It's about staying intact. The most dangerous mistake you make with a toxic person is believing you are in a conversation. You think you are explaining. You think you are clarifying. You think that if you find the right words, the right tone, the right amount of patience, something will finally click. You believe understanding will end the tension. You believe kindness will soften them. That belief feels mature, reasonable, even noble. And it is exactly why you keep losing. Because while you think you are communicating, they think they are playing. Every explanation you offer becomes material. Every emotion you show becomes leverage. You speak to be understood. They listen to collect data. Notice how it always ends the same way. You argue for an hour, walking through details, timelines, intentions. Your voice gets tired. Your body slumps. They sit back, calm, sometimes even amused. Later, you remember every sentence you said. They remember nothing or pretend they don't. Not because they forgot, but because the outcome already served them. Your exhaustion was the point. This is the illusion that traps intelligent, empathetic people. You assume the other person is operating from the same rules. You assume honesty invites honesty. It doesn't. With toxic people, honesty invites exploitation. When you explain yourself, you are not clearing confusion. You are handing them bullets they can fire later. When you react emotionally, you are not standing up for yourself. You are confirming that they can reach inside you on command. Power does not come from volume or logic here. It comes from control over your state. And every time you lose your calm, they gain ground. Think about how strange that feels. You leave drained. They leave energized. You question yourself. They feel validated. That imbalance is not accidental. It is structural. You are bringing empathy to a power struggle. You are offering sincerity to someone who uses sincerity as a tool. This is why being more understanding never works. This is why trying harder only makes it worse. The moment you stop seeing this as a misunderstanding and start seeing it as a game, everything shifts. Games have rules, games have winners, and the first rule is simple. The player who reacts loses. You think you're communicating. They think they're harvesting. Once you see that you've been playing their game, you don't need more explanations. You need a structure. You need rules that work even when the other person doesn't play fair. That's why this video is built around 7 principles. Not theories. Not advice meant to make you feel good. 7 practical principles that dismantle toxic dynamics step by step. Each one removes a source of their power. Each one gives control back to you. We start with the first principle, the foundation everything else stands on. Become the void. The first principle is simple, uncomfortable, and incredibly effective. You stop giving them something to hit. Toxic people do not survive on logic. They survive on reaction. They need your facial expression to change. They need your voice to tighten. They need you to explain yourself so they can twist it. Without those things, their power collapses. This is why becoming the void works. A void does not argue. A void does not defend. A void does not offer emotion as proof of worth. Strategic silence is not weakness. It is pressure without effort. When you stop reacting, you interrupt the loop they depend on. Most people think silence means you are losing. In reality, silence is how you exit their frame. Think about how often you feel pulled to respond. A sharp comment, a subtle jab, a joke that lands just a little too close to something personal. Your instinct is to correct it, to clarify, to protect your image. That instinct is exactly what they are counting on. When you resist it, the game starts breaking. Imagine a meeting. A coworker says, "Well, I guess some of us have more free time than others," with a smile that isn't friendly. The old version of you rushes to justify. You list hours worked. You sound defensive. Everyone feels the tension. The Machiavellian move is different. You pause. You look at them calmly. You say, "Interesting perspective." Then you turn back to your presentation and continue as if nothing happened. That moment does more than any argument ever could. You deny them fuel. You expose their comment as small without naming it. You signal to the room that you are not available for side games. Silence forces the spotlight back onto them. And here is what happens next. They feel it. The lack of reaction unsettles them. They may escalate. They may repeat the jab louder. This is not failure. This is confirmation. They are pressing buttons that no longer work. Stay still. Stay flat. Let the discomfort sit where it belongs, with them. Becoming the void does not mean disappearing from life. It means removing yourself as a source of emotional supply. You are still polite, still present, still professional. But you are no longer transparent. No explanations, no emotional essays, no visible wounds. Over time, they lose interest. Not because they grew kinder, but because you stopped being profitable. This technique feels unnatural at first because you were trained to believe reaction equals self-respect. The truth is the opposite. Self-respect is choosing when not to engage. Power is deciding where your energy does not go. An insult only hurts if it finds a target. The second principle feels counterintuitive, especially if you were raised to believe that openness builds trust. With healthy people, that is true. Sharing creates closeness. Honesty deepens bonds. But with toxic people, information is not connection. Information is leverage. They don't receive your truth with care. They store it. They catalog it. And they wait for the moment it can be used against you. Think about how often your own words come back to haunt you. You tell someone you're stressed, trying to be real, and suddenly that stress is thrown in your face the next time you hesitate. You mention money is tight, and weeks later it's used to guilt you, pressure you, or make you feel small. Nothing you say disappears. It all becomes currency. This is why being honest keeps hurting you. You are speaking as if you're safe when you're not. Toxic people are not listening to understand your inner world. They are listening for weak spots. Every fear you reveal, every doubt you admit, every struggle you describe gives them a better map of where to push later. And when they push, they do it calmly, casually, often with a smile. That's why it feels so confusing. You think you shared something vulnerable. They think you handed them a tool. The solution is not lying. It's ambiguity. You stop feeding them real data. You stop narrating your inner life. You answer politely, briefly, and vaguely. "I'm good. Busy. You know how it is." That sentence is not empty. It's protective. It gives them nothing to grip. When they ask follow-up questions, you don't elaborate. You redirect. You keep things surface level without being rude. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming selective. You still share deeply, just not with people who have proven they turn intimacy into ammunition. Notice how this shifts the dynamic. They become restless. They probe more. They accuse you of being distant. That discomfort is information. It tells you how much control they expected to have. You are not being secretive, you are being strategic. In the physical world, you wouldn't hand a stranger the keys to your house just to appear friendly. Your inner world deserves the same protection. Privacy is not secrecy, it's armor. The third principle is where most people resist, because it feels like surrender. It isn't. It's psychological judo. Instead of pushing back against force, you redirect it until it collapses under its own weight. Toxic people expect resistance. They provoke so you will argue. They accuse so you will defend. The moment you push back, you step onto their battlefield. And on that battlefield, they are faster, colder, and far less invested in truth than you are. This is why arguing never works. When you deny their accusation, they escalate. When you explain, they interrupt. When you prove your point, they shift the topic. You think you're standing up for yourself, but all you are doing is feeding the conflict. Psychological judo flips this dynamic. You stop refuting the attack. You agree with the feeling, not the verdict. This distinction is everything. Imagine someone says, "You're overreacting right now." Your instinct is to fight it. "I'm not overreacting. You're the one who..." And suddenly you're trapped in a loop that can last hours. The judo response is different. Calm voice, neutral face. "I can see why you'd think that." Then silence. You didn't accept blame. You didn't apologize. You didn't say they were right. You acknowledged their perception and removed the fight. That sentence gives them nothing to grab. Agreement without submission confuses toxic people because it short-circuits their script. They prepared for a battle. You refuse to show up. This technique works because toxic behavior depends on polarity. They need you to be the opposite side of the argument. When you agree with the surface, there is no friction. The aggression has nowhere to land, so it rebounds inward. Another example. A manipulative parent says, "You never make time for this family." The defensive route leads to lists, calendars, raised voices, and guilt. The judo route sounds like this. "You're right. It probably doesn't feel like enough to you." Full stop. No justification, no promise to change, no emotional collapse, just agreement with their experience. Watch what happens next. Often they stall, they repeat themselves, they grow irritated. That irritation is the sound of control slipping. This approach protects your energy because it removes your ego from the exchange. You are no longer trying to win the argument. You are trying to end the interaction intact. Being right is expensive. It costs time, emotional stability, and peace. Ending the fight costs nothing. This is not passive. It requires discipline. It requires you to tolerate the discomfort of not correcting the record. But that discomfort is temporary. The exhaustion from endless conflict is not. You don't win by being right. You win by ending the fight. The fourth principle is quiet, subtle, and deeply disruptive to toxic dynamics. It is intentional absence. Toxic people thrive on access. When you are always available, always reachable, always ready to respond, you become predictable. Predictability makes you cheap. Not because you lack value, but because there is no cost to reaching you. Scarcity changes that completely. Scarcity creates gravity. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, people feel it. This does not mean playing games or acting cold. It means reclaiming control over when and how you are available. Notice how toxic behavior escalates when you don't reply immediately. A missed call becomes multiple calls. A delayed text becomes accusations. Where were you? Why didn't you answer? Those reactions expose the expectation they had of unlimited access to you. And that expectation is the real problem. You do not owe instant availability to anyone who drains you. Start small. You don't respond the moment your phone lights up. You don't rearrange your schedule every time they want your attention. You don't show up to every gathering out of guilt or habit. And most importantly, you do not explain yourself. Explanations reopen negotiation. Silence closes it. When asked why you were unavailable, a simple "I was busy" is enough. You do not defend that statement. You do not justify it. You let it stand. This shift creates discomfort, not for you, but for them. Their control relied on your predictability. When that disappears, they feel unsettled. They may accuse you of changing. They may say you're distant or selfish. That is not feedback. That is withdrawal from a supply being cut off. Emotional absence is just as powerful as physical absence. You can be in the same room and still be unreachable. Fewer words, less emotional engagement, no urgency. Over time, this retrains the dynamic. They either adjust their behavior or move on to someone easier. Both outcomes benefit you. Scarcity is not punishment. It is filtration. It shows who respects your boundaries and who only valued your access. This principle protects your nervous system. It gives your mind space to recover, and it reminds you of something essential. Your time is not neutral. Your attention is not free. When you stop offering yourself without limits, you stop being consumed. Access to you is a privilege, not a right. There are moments when silence and distance are not enough. Sometimes a toxic person corners you in public. Sometimes they slip a comment disguised as a joke, a smile hiding a blade, counting on your politeness to protect them. This is when passive endurance becomes permission. The mistake most people make here is retaliation in the dark. Sarcasm, gossip, passive aggression. That feels satisfying for a second. Then it backfires. Toxic people are experts at shadows. They twist private reactions, deny tone, rewrite history. Quiet revenge only feeds their advantage. The counter is exposure, not anger. You bring them into the light. This is the spotlight. When they make a cutting remark in front of others, you don't laugh it off. You don't snap back. You stop. You look at them calmly and ask, "Can you explain what you meant by that?" Then you wait. That pause does the work. The room shifts. The joke loses oxygen. They are forced to translate implication into plain language. Most can't. They stumble. They retreat. They say, "I was just kidding," or "You're too sensitive." You don't argue. You keep the light on. "I understand you were joking. I just want to understand the joke." Now the burden is on them. They must either admit the cruelty or expose their incompetence. Either way, the mask slips. This is not about humiliating them. It's about removing camouflage. Predators rely on plausible deniability. When you ask for clarity, you take it away. Notice what you did not do. You didn't insult them. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't explain your feelings. You asked a neutral question and let reality speak. This protects you because it anchors the interaction in observable behavior, not emotional debate. It also sends a clear signal to everyone watching. You are not fragile. You are not afraid of awkwardness. You are willing to pause the room to protect your boundaries. That reputation spreads quietly. People learn where the line is with you. Toxic individuals feel it immediately. They may label you difficult. Good. Difficult means expensive. Hard to digest, not worth the risk. Use the spotlight sparingly, only when there is an audience and a pattern. Not for every slight. Precision matters. When applied correctly, this ends games fast. Predators survive in shadows. When toxic people lose control over you, they rarely stop quietly. They change tactics. If they can't reach you directly, they try to reach your reputation. This is the smear campaign. Subtle comments, Half-truths, concerned whispers framed as care. They don't attack you head-on. They poison the well and let others drink. Your instinct will be to defend yourself, to explain, to clear your name before the story spreads. That instinct is understandable, and it is exactly what turns a smear into a wildfire. The moment you start chasing every rumor, you look reactive. You look nervous. You look like someone with something to hide. Toxic people thrive in that chaos. The counterintuitive truth is this: you do not beat a smear campaign with words. You beat it with consistency. You let your behavior become so stable, so predictable, so grounded that the lies cannot stick. Imagine someone tells you, "I heard you're difficult to work with." The weak response is a detailed defense. The strategic response is calm indifference. That's unfortunate. "I've always tried to be professional." Then you move on. No rant, no counterattack, no emotional leakage. Over time, people notice the gap. They see how you act versus how you're described. That gap creates doubt, not about you, but about the person spreading the story. Toxic people rely on emotional reactions to validate their narrative. When you deny them that reaction, the story starves. This takes patience. Smear campaigns don't collapse overnight. They collapse when the instigator keeps escalating while you remain steady. Eventually, their tone becomes extreme. Yours doesn't. Their version becomes dramatic. Yours stays boring. And boring is powerful. Boring is credible. You are building a reputation fortress brick by brick, not with speeches, but with repeated behavior. Competence, calm, reliability. That fortress does not need defending. Lies break when they hit it. Silence here is not passivity. It is confidence. You are saying without words that your life does not revolve around correcting every misunderstanding. The truth does not need you to chase it. It moves slower, but it lasts. Let contrast do the talking. The final Machiavellian exit is the one most people avoid because it feels cruel, but it is actually clean. You do not explain. You do not argue. You do not seek understanding. You disappear without ceremony. Toxic people do not want closure. They want control disguised as closure. They want one last conversation to rewrite the story, extract emotion, or keep a thread attached to you. Every explanation you give becomes a hook. Every goodbye becomes a negotiation. Silence removes the hooks. When you vanish without warning, you deny them their favorite weapon, the last word. This is not running away. It is ending a war that only one side wanted. You block the number, you stop replying, you remove access quietly and completely. No dramatic speeches, no final texts written at midnight, no checking back to see if they noticed. Turning back is how the door reopens, and toxic people only need a crack. They will accuse you of being heartless. They will tell others you abandoned them. Let them. Closure is for healthy relationships. With toxic ones, closure is just another arena. The Machiavellian exit protects your future by sacrificing their comfort. At first, the silence will feel heavy. Your mind will search for reasons to explain yourself. Resist it. That urge is the last chain. Over time, the quiet becomes relief. Your nervous system resets. Your thoughts slow down. You realize how much energy was spent managing someone else's reactions. Disappearing is not about punishment. It is about survival. You are choosing yourself without asking permission. And that choice terrifies people who relied on your availability. Silence is the only goodbye they cannot control. It closes the loop forever and leaves you free to build a life untouched by their reach. No echoes, no debts, no explanations. You are not colder now. You are clearer. For a long time, you confused harmlessness with goodness. You believed that being agreeable, open, and endlessly patient made you virtuous. It didn't. It made you accessible. Harmless people aren't good. They're simply unable to protect themselves. True virtue requires strength. It requires the ability to say no, to withdraw, to hold silence without guilt. What you've learned here is not manipulation. It is self-preservation with awareness. A formidable person is not cruel. A formidable person is contained. They choose when to engage and when to disappear. They don't need to dominate because they are no longer dominated. When kindness comes from strength, it becomes clean. It is offered, not extracted. It has boundaries. It has weight. This is why toxic people fade from your life when you change. Not because you attacked them, but because you stopped feeding them. You built walls, not to shut the world out, but to protect what matters inside. And behind those walls, your empathy survives. It matures. It stops being a liability and becomes a choice. You didn't lose your kindness. You just stopped handing it to people who weaponized it. That is real power.